Yeah. Hello. How is everyone? We're just waiting for our guest speaker. Hello Ali, hello Tyra. Basically, we're just waiting for Mizan. I'm just waiting to send her a request. What have you guys been up to? If you guys have any questions, just literally drop them whenever, and then at the end, we'll get to them. But yeah. Are you guys excited? Oh, we got a question. When our passport hoodies being I don't know when our passport hoodies being released. Hopefully soon. Hopefully soon, inshallah. Yeah, same guys, uni is mad. I'm good. I've just been doing work too. Just been doing lots of uni work. But yeah. Have you guys joined any other events, like any other Israel-Apartheid events? Palestine Solidarity Campaign have so many. Hello Mizan, if you press the request button, it should come up. Your request. So,
hi, can you hear me?
hello, yes, we can hear you. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
How are you doing? You all right?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. Thank you so much for inviting me to this event. Hold on, let me just get my camera.
No, that's okay.
So just using my phone. Thank you so much for inviting me to this very interesting event. Looking forward to talking to you guys. And yeah, let's get it going.
Cool. So guys, this is Mizan. He works for Palestine Solidarity Campaign. He's a prominent activist, very active in the community. And today we'll cover topics of apartheid and also racism. If you guys have any questions, put them in the comment section and we'll get back to them. Mizan, if there's anything you'd like to add about yourself, then please go ahead.
Yeah, so basically what you just said is correct. Like, I'm an activist for Palestinian rights. I have been involved in the Palestine Solidarity Campaign for a number of years. I am the lead for Harrow and Brent Palestine Solidarity Campaign in Harrow, my local branch. And basically, for me, like, my interest in Palestine is something that got me, it's something that really, really woke me up in terms of what's going on.
Yeah.
You know, many people, you know, if you talk to a lot of activists today, many people say that, you know, what really made them see what was going on in Israel / Palestine was the Gaza wars, the bombings in Gaza that happened, Operation Cast Lead, the Protective Edge. But for me, the pivotal moment was the second Intifada. Literally, I remember watching on the news, Ariel Sharon on the temple, you know, on what they call the Temple Mount, you know, one of the pillars of, you know, in the Al-Aqsa complex, and the news reporter not explaining why this was happening. That was such a shock, and that image still haunts me today. And that kind of opened up a sense of curiosity. And I thank Noam Chomsky, because it was his books and his speeches on Palestine that made me see that, hold on, this isn't a religious war.
Things are adding up, right?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Sorry, like, it's some things are adding up. There's so much that's been covered.
Yeah, exactly. So there was a lot of things, and Noam Chomsky kind of explained the framework of occupation and settler colonialism. And from then on, I've just always been doing my own kind of research on Palestine, and it's been going on for about 12 years now. So,
well, so you got a lot of research.
Thank you. I think, to be honest with you, like, you start off with like your Norman Finkelsteins and, like, you know, your Noam Chomsky, but then what that's led me on to is actual reading from Palestinian academics and scholars.
Yeah.
So a lot of Saeed. Now you have Noura Erakat, who I learned a lot from. and other people. There's a lot of the body of work on Palestine is very it's vast. There's a lot of it, and I would say that yes, it is an issue that is a cause, is a right cause, but it is a cause that also requires you to constantly engage with the knowledge of what happened and what's going on now, because the system, the matrix of control that Israel has over Palestinians, wherever you are, is very complex, and you need to be engaged with the centers of knowledge in regards to this issue. Not only you are fully grounded on the issue, but also you can articulate the issue to the wider public who I believe are miseducated when it comes to Palestine because of the media.
Yeah, that's really true, especially with the fact that on mainstream media you hear Israel discuss the occupied territories as disputed, when we all know that's not the case. We all know it's occupation, it's apartheid, it's illegal under international law.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of misinformation. So if we start with the topic of racism, based on my research, I found the definition of racism on an organizational level is a collective failure to provide an inclusive and professional environment for people because of their race or ethnicity. On top of that, there's also the issue of institutional racism, which is based on the definition in the Macpherson report. In the Macpherson 1999 report. So relating back to the Palestinians, how do they themselves experience racism on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, so I have to make one thing clear. I'm not Palestinian, so how do they themselves? That is, I'm not even going to put myself in those shoes because it's not right for me to do so. But I'll tell you from what I've learned and from what I know. So basically, this is my personal opinion. The racism that I think that I believe that the Palestinians face, whether in Israel proper, in the Green Line 1948 Israel, or in the occupied territories, I define it as systemic racism. It's a racism of control. It's a mechanism of control.
Yeah.
But also, it's like what you said about institutional racism. That fits in as well. So the thing is, when we talk about racism, we talk about individual biases that we might have, and we might discriminate based on race. But whereas there is the other added factor of not just the discrimination based on race, but the added factor of exercising that discrimination that ruins a whole community, and you have the power to do so. So race, the systemic racism is not just that discrimination, but also having the power to exercise that discrimination. And that's what I believe that is what is at play in Palestine, in Israel, where you have a very, very powerful system that excludes Palestinians in all walks of their life. And B'Tselem, the human rights organization, have come out and actually said that all parts of Israel, whether the occupied Palestine, whether the occupied territories or within Israel proper, it is one single regime which ensures that in every aspect of it, basically Palestinians are not equal to their Jewish counterparts. So basically, it's a system of discrimination that discriminates against the Palestinians based on their race. And what it does is that it ensures full equality for one group of people, but discriminates against another group of people, which is the Palestinians. So even though you were talking about institutional racism within, you could say, within countries like within Western states, with Israel, it's more entrenched, systemic, institutional racism. And so, this is the issue, because this whole, understanding it in this way as an apartheid state, as a state that enforces systemic racism on a group of people, it kind of upends this understanding that this is a conflict between two people who have two different understandings with two different narratives and two different understandings. It's it kind of gives the impression that there's some sort of parity between both groups of people, whereas what the reality is that you have one group of people who not only come with an ideology that is based on settler colonialism, but also they have the resources to actually implement that kind of ideological framework. So that's the issue when it comes to racism in Palestine. But also, we have to also be clear, as do the Palestinians within Israel proper. I'm not talking about in the occupied territories now.
Yeah.
Within 1948 Israel, their kind of discrimination, because the system that works in Israel is very complex, and it depends on where you are. So, for example, in 1948 Israel, Palestinian citizens of Israel, they do have more rights than, for example, those in East Jerusalem or in the West Bank. But just because they have more rights, that it doesn't mean that they have equal rights to their Jewish counterparts in Israel. So the Jewish counterparts in Israel have full rights, and then the Arab citizens of Israel have lesser rights. So they're not equal in that sense. Obviously, the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, they have residency status, so they don't, they're not seen as full citizens. Within the West Bank now, in the occupied territories, you have the settlers who come under Israeli civilian law, but then you have the Palestinian citizens of Israel who come under Israeli military law. And then obviously in Gaza, you have a siege and you have a blockade, which Israel controls from the outside. And then I will also say that in the diaspora, you have a refugee population that is denied the right to go home. But whereas if you're a Jew, then you are applicable to gain citizenship in Israel based on the fact that you're a Jew. So there is discrimination on all rounds, and also just as you have within the occupied territories and within Israel, you have institutions, you have organizations like the security apparatus, like the Shin Bet, who basically monitor all forms of Palestinian activity. You have the Mossad as well that do that in the outside as well, because they see it all as a threat to the state of Israel. So you have these pro-Israel advocacy groups that, based on the fact that they are also ideologically aligned to the Zionist movement, they see any form of Palestinian advocacy outside of Israel-Palestine proper, so in other countries, as not a threat, but as something that they are very worried about. And so therefore, even advocacy for Palestinians outside of Israel-Palestine in other countries, whether that's by Palestinians themselves or advocates for Palestinian rights, that's also something that is countered by pro-Israel affinity organizations and individuals as well. So there's a lot of levels where the system is just not fair. It discriminates against Palestinians and against advocates for Palestinian rights in every level. But also, I would also want to add that there is also, and again, this forms into this thing about anti-Palestinian racism, that when you look at the narrative of Israel-Palestine, majority of the people of the West, especially for those in power, they believe that it is the Israelis that are indigenous to that territorial area where Israel is, right? So Palestinians aren't really understood to be indigenous, and that's another problem. So even establishing the right of Palestinians as indigenous people in that territorial area where Israel is and where the occupied Palestinian territories is. That's something that we have to we have to kind of recalibrate and put on the table, that Palestinians are also indigenous people, and they are indigenous to the territorial area where Israel/Palestine is. So it's a very, very complex system of exclusion on every level, and it's something that will take for us to pressure multiple pressure points for us to actually kind of counter and start winning this battle. But we will get there. The truth will always prevail, and justice will always prevail.
Definitely. I think you raised a really important point about apartheid. So as we're seeing now, there's the issue of a medical apartheid. There was an article in the news recently where a student from Tel Aviv University was denied the COVID vaccine. Again, that's another form of direct racism. And also, like you mentioned, the blockade. So, for example, places like Gaza face so much higher levels of poverty compared to places in Israel. So a statistic from the Palestinian Central Bureau of Stats said that 53% of the population in Gaza is in poverty. And also how Israel controls the water sources in Palestine. 90% of the water in Gaza is unfit for human consumption. That in itself is an apartheid, because you're creating a division within one area of land.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So you hit something very important. So obviously, with the whole situation in Gaza, and the blockade, you know, a lot of people think that, you know, when it comes to the blockade of Gaza, and the separation of Gaza, really the separation of Gaza, that is because of the fact that Hamas was voted in, right? And now I'm of the opinion that the current Palestinian leadership, whether the PA or whether Hamas, they need to be replaced. They need to go, and they need to be replaced by a younger generation of Palestinians who have better ideas and better understanding of how to fight for liberation. But it's important to understand that the separation of Gaza happened a long time. You know, it happened from a while back. It didn't really start in 2000, didn't really start because of the election of Hamas. The first fence that went up, separating Gaza from, you know, the rest of Israel/Palestine, happened in 1993, and it happened after the Oslo signings. So that is very, very important. Yitzhak Rabin, ex-Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who, you know, who is seen as the quote-unquote dove. He's not a dove, basically, but, you know, within Israel, he's seen as the one that tried to make peace with the Palestinians, but that's not the case. He himself, before his assassination, said something along the lines of he wishes he could see Gaza just sink into the sea. So Israel has always seen Gaza as something separate. And in fact, historically, Gaza has been a site of Palestinian resistance, you know, from the 60s onwards, for a very, very long time. And the thing is that Gaza itself, the population of Gaza, I think about 70 to 80% of them, I'm not sure the exact amount, but a large amount of them are refugees. They're refugees from the West Bank, and the refugees from the earlier ethnic cleansing of Palestine in 48. So when you see this issue, you know, when the Palestinians in Gaza, you know, adopt the right of, you know, the Great Return March, for example, they're adopting their right to return home as refugees, because they were ethnically cleansed or forced out of where they were before into Gaza. So it's a refugee population which Israel has been bombing. And some people say that it's an equivalent to bombing a refugee camp, for example. And it's a very short space. Gaza's not that big. It's a very short, condensed space. So, you know, you have to understand all of that. And then you also mentioned water. Now, water is something that Israel has total control over Palestinian water since the 1967 war. Since that, in the occupied territories, Israel has basically been, a lot of people have different terms. I call it stealing. We call it stealing Palestinian water from the Palestinian areas, rerouting that towards Israel. And then what they do is that the settlers get more water even within the West Bank, but the water that the Palestinians are sold back, so Palestinians have to buy back their own water, is at a lower rate. So you have a system where the water is redirected towards Israel instead of the Palestinian areas, and it's sold back to the Palestinians at a lower rate. And the settlers in the West Bank, they get more water than the Palestinians. And it's called water. A lot of our advocates for Palestinian rights, especially my colleagues with the Stop the JNF campaign, they call it water apartheid. This is also a form of discrimination when it comes to access to water and land resources as well. So the thing is, there's a lot of ways that Israel controls the resources. It controls also Palestinians. They don't have any, there's no, if you're talking about a conflict, there's no fighter jets, there's no airplanes. So Israel controls the air, it controls the water, it controls the land, because you have to understand when you're talking about blockade, Israel controls, well, obviously Egypt as well, but Israel is the main controller over the blockade in terms of who comes in and what goes out and who goes out and all that kind of stuff. In the West Bank, there's this narrative that the PA controls the West Bank. That's not the case. The PA doesn't. Obviously, we all know that it's an occupation in the West Bank. But what the Oslo Accord did was that it afforded some control of the PA to the PA to control certain enclaves of the West Bank, certain small geographic areas in the West Bank, like little areas. You could call them suburbs or cities, right? But Israel controls the rest of it. That's the problem. It controls the rest of the West Bank in terms of water and land. So this idea is that that the Palestinians control the West Bank, the PA controls the West Bank. No, it doesn't. It doesn't, because PA only controls certain areas of Area A of West Bank, which are like small cities, and then you have outside Area A, then you have Area B, which is like a joint control between the PA and Israel. But then Area B is controlled by the rest of, is surrounded by Area C, which is the rest of the West Bank, and that's only controlled by Israel. So in reality, Israel controls the West Bank, and it's an occupation. So these are the things about the complex nature of it, about the complex nature of Gaza. When Israel says that it no longer controls Gaza because it doesn't have any settlements or its soldiers aren't in Gaza. Norman Finkelstein said it the best. He goes, the jailers. So he kind of described Gaza as a jail, and he said that the jailers, what they've done is, instead of being in the jail, what they've done is that they've given the keys to the prisoners, but the jailers have redeployed to the outside of the jail and just controlling the jail from the outside.
Yeah.
So that's happening, and unfortunately, that's with Gaza. When it comes to Hamas and stuff, they have changed their policies a lot. But this is the other thing. This whole thing, when it comes to Hamas, this comes under the framing of the war on terror now, unfortunately, and they're seen as a terrorist organization now. So no matter what Hamas do, they're always going to be tainted with that. But to be honest with you, I'm of the opinion that, look, they've been there for a very long time. So is the PA. It's time for a new leadership now. But I'm not saying that in this new leadership, Israel's going to let them go. I don't believe it will. But you have the chance of new ideas, new ways of resisting coming in, young people now coming in with new ideas, and they should be given the chance, really, to lead and to take the liberation struggle forward. But with that, I also believe that when it comes to a valid vision of what liberation would look like, it also needs to include the Palestinians of East Jerusalem. And this is just my opinion, but, people don't have to follow it, but also some sort of the leadership of the Palestinians in Israel as well. It needs to include all of them, but that's just my opinion.
Thank you for that. Definitely, you raised a lot of good points, especially again, the water apartheid. I didn't know that it was termed water apartheid. But if you go back to the definition of apartheid, which is inhuman acts committed for the purpose of establishing and maintaining domination by one racial group over another racial group and systematically oppressing them, that fits into everything you just said, on top of the issues of things like checkpoints, occupied territories, abuse by soldiers. Also the fact that on the driving license it says if you're an Israeli or a Palestinian, and they won't let you drive if they see that you're a Palestinian.
I'm not sure
also
about
the fact that Israel...
Yeah, go on, carry on.
Sorry, what are you saying?
Sorry,
I'm not sure.
Yeah, sorry, go on, carry on.
Sorry, I think you're lagging. So I just wanted to quickly add the fact that Israel has vaccinated over 20% of its population. But there's been no talk about Palestinians getting the vaccine or anything like that. Also the fact that the hospitals in Gaza are severely overworked and under a lot of pressure. They don't have the capacity to deliver the medical services. They're working overtime. On top of that, these people still need to provide for their families, but they're just not being given access to resources at every single level.
Yes, and that is a sign, that is a symptom of this apartheid and discriminatory nature. So when it comes to people, it's called COVID apartheid or medical apartheid. So I first heard of, the discriminatory aspects of this on a Mondoweiss article that came out sometime last year, where even before, when it comes to talking of the Palestinian territories, the Israeli Arab towns in Israel themselves were getting vaccinated really late. So the thing is that, so there was discrimination within the Israeli Arab, Palestinian Arabs themselves. They were getting a couple of weeks late. And also there's other issues to do with language, for example, like the information about the vaccine was not translated to Arabic, it was Hebrew, all this kind of stuff. And then you had the news outbreak of the fact that the Israeli settlers in the West Bank were getting priority treatment, where they were getting vaccinated first. And the Palestinians were not getting vaccinated at all. And obviously, why that happened is, it's a system of discrimination, let's no doubt. But unfortunately, Israel was using the Oslo Agreement as a way of negating its responsibility, because according to the Oslo Agreement, when it comes to the welfare of the Palestinian people, that's up to the PA. But the PA have said that they've requested vaccines, etc., etc. But even the everyone in the international community who believes what's happening in the West Bank is an occupation. Therefore, it is the responsibility of Israel. Doesn't matter about what they agreed in the Oslo Agreement. It is the responsibility of Israel to provide the vaccine. Now, the thing is, in Gaza, I heard that this was last year sometime, that's even worse in Gaza. That's much more even, but that's not even spoken about. The last time I heard that Israel did drop some vaccines off to Gaza, it was something along the lines of a couple of hundred vaccines, not that much. at all.
Yeah.
That's like literally dismal. And obviously in the West Bank, I was just actually, before listening to this, I was listening to a talk an interview by Dr. Hanan Ashrawi from the PLO, and she actually said that, just for Israel to shake up its image as an apartheid state, it did provide vaccines to the Palestinians on the West Bank, but it's only provided 5,000, which is not that much when you think of the fact that there's millions of Palestinians in the West Bank. So it's a real drop in the ocean. What it is that, again, when you look at the economy, when you look at the Palestinian economy, it's it's crippled by occupation. The occupation does not allow the Palestinian economy to grow. It does not allow the Palestinian industries to grow. The health sector is very much affected. Obviously, in Gaza, because of the constant bombing, the economy has been destroyed. The health sector and the health services in Gaza have been, they've been overwhelmed anyway because of what's happened in terms of, Operation Cast Lead and Protective Edge and stuff like that, and the ongoing killings of Palestinians who want to return. So the sniper shooting and the shooting of Palestinians on the border, sorry, not the border, the fence. So it's been overwhelmed anyway, and now this has just made it even worse. I believe that, unfortunately, this is what Israel's been. If you look at Gaza, what Israel's doing is what Yitzhak Rabin and what all these other all these other leaders want for the people of Gaza to experience, which is literally just cut them off, literally just throw them in the sea.
Yeah.
That's what it wants, unfortunately. And in the West Bank, what you have is an environment where Palestinians are coerced to leave, basically, coerced to want to leave. So you got the checkpoints, you got the inequality, the water apartheid, the COVID apartheid now as well. And this is all an environment where, to get the Palestinians to think that, it's better if you just go somewhere else, basically. It's better if you just go, because obviously the goal of those in power in Israel is that they want an erect Israel. They want the greater Israel. They want all of the occupied territories. So that's basically the goal. And that's basically the reason why the system is as it is today. So yeah, there's a lot. So in terms of the COVID apartheid and the health various health sectors, yes. But we do also have solidarity. Like, you do also have doctors that have gone over there, that go over there. You have Palestine, Medical Aid for Palestine, for example, a charity that basically does medical aid for Palestinians, for example. And these charities need to be supported, and these organizations need to be supported. However, the main thing that needs to be done is that the occupation needs to come to an end, and this system of apartheid needs to be dismantled and replaced by a system that treats Palestinians, Israelis, and all other minorities as equal citizens, and they get the same rights as everyone else. I think, and that's just not for Israel-Palestine. I believe we need to have a system of equality throughout the whole of the Middle East as well. So dictatorships need to go, and they need to be replaced with a representative government who will treat everyone as equal. So it's not just Israel-Palestine, it's everywhere else, but that territory can serve as a real beacon of light for equality if that were to happen. And I hope that does happen.
Hopefully. Thank you so much for all your insight. You raised some really good points. We'll move on to questions quickly. So first one is, can you recommend any books to read on the history of Palestine and Israel conflict?
Yeah, so I've got tons. Actually, I've got some books here lined up, which I'm gonna say at the end. But for example, Ilan Pappé's Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. That's one. Then you have a book by Nur Masalha called A 4,000-Year History of Palestine. That's another one. And then you have another book called the Dark Side of Zionism. I forgot the author's name, but just if you just type in the Dark Side of Zionism, you will get the book. So that book as well. But because when you approached me for this event, you said that we were going to be talking about racism and COVID. I have a selection of books as well that I just want to quickly promote. So, for example, this one, Israel-Palestine and the Politics of Race, Exploring Identity and Power in a Global Context by Yasmin Abu-Laban and Abigail B. Bakan. This one, I think, is a very, very good needed book. Tells you about the racism that defines the Israeli-Palestine issue. So this is one. Another one, and again, this is I haven't read this book, but I can tell that this is already going to be a very important book because of the fact that there's new awareness about the Palestine situation, and therefore to articulate Palestine in a socialist context is very, very much important. So this one, called Palestine, A Socialist Introduction by Sumaya Awad and Brian Bean. Very, very good book. It takes socialist principles and introduces Palestine within those contexts. So again, this is well needed for new and upcoming activists who want to advocate and explain what's going on in Palestine to socialists, actually, to left-wing socialists, and introduce it as a progressive cause. Very, very important book. But also there's another one which I want to promote as well. And this is about, again, what's going on in certain progressive trends in Israel and Palestine now, and how we can further progress, we can further push forward these trends. This one's called Decolonizing Israel and Liberating Palestine, from Jeff Halper. And the subtitle is Zionism, Settler Colonialism, and the Case for a One Democratic State. This is very good because not only does he make the case for a one democratic state, but Jeff Halper also tells you about progressive movements within Israel who are advocating for Palestinian rights. So they are small movements, but they are part of the decolonial struggle in Israel, and they should be supported. So definitely get this book. But there's another book that I'm going to promote, and the reason why I'm going to promote it is because it's not about Palestine, but it's about what Israel has historically been doing outside of Palestine, basically, with the United States. Now, this book is an old book. I'm not going to lie, it's an old book. It came out in 1991, but it is an amazingly very important book. This one's called Dangerous Liaison, the inside story of the U.S.-Israeli covert relationship and the international activities that it has served to conceal, by Andrew and Leslie Cockburn. Dangerous Liaison. I'm reading this book now. It's an eye-opener, literally an eye-opener. What Israel has done outside of, in Latin America, how Israel and the intelligence services will team up with Western intelligence services to stop progressive movements in other countries, support Idi Amin, support apartheid South Africa, but also other stuff as well. And also what Israel and the Mossad have done in London as well, in a historical context. It is such an eye-opening book, and I definitely think that in regards to an historical context, definitely get this book, Dangerous Liaison. A lot of advocates for Palestinian rights who have been advocates for Palestinian rights for a very long time have recommended this book as a very important book because it goes into what Mossad have done before and why they've done these things before. So those are the books that I would definitely recommend people to read.
Thank you. I'll make a list of these and I'll post them on our socials or our group chats. Our second question is there anything being done to educate and highlight these issues to university students? Quickly from my side, before I hand it over to you, Mizan, directly from universities, there's not much going on unless you're involved in a Palestine society, because then it falls up to us to be educated and to teach ourselves and to raise awareness. But from universities directly, we're not taught anything. But I'll hand it over to you, Mizan.
Yeah, I wholly agree. So I think you're the best person to actually answer that question, because you're the University of Leicester Palestine Society. So your experience is also, is primary when it comes to this question. But I will also say one thing, which is that even though there's a lack of education in regards to Palestine, there is also a push for universities to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance of Anti-Semitism or for universities. And also what you have is that there seems to be a new campaign that has started and is targeted David Miller from the University of Bristol, who, fine, I don't agree with all of the language and the vocabulary that he uses, but it seems to be a campaign to silence pro-Palestinian academics, really. And so there is that campaign going on as well. Now, it's at the start. David Miller's like the first academic that has been targeted, but as you know, he doesn't stop. He doesn't stop with one person. It will just go on. So, advocates for Palestinian rights and Palestinian students in universities, you have to know about what's going on in the current trends so that you can respond appropriately. You have to know about the various definitions of anti-Semitism and stuff that your university might adopt. But also, yes, in terms of education, because of these things, don't expect the university to educate you. And this is the thing. When I saw the image of Ariel Sharon, I was a university student. Universities were not educating us anything about Palestine. That hasn't stopped. That's still not happening. But I have to get my own education. Literally, I have to go and get the political books. I have to read them. Listen to the lectures. And I would say what you can do is listen and read and educate yourself about Palestine. I would say go listen to people like Noura Arakat, Salma Karmi Ayub, listen to lectures from the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, Norman Finkelstein, etc. Listen to the lectures, read their book, but then promote it yourselves. Like literally get on your social media and start sharing the lectures and stuff and say, listen, you need to listen to, this is something that you can learn from. So this is what I've been doing, because universities themselves didn't do it, but also because of the fact that they don't want to be tarred with this label of anti-Semitism, a lot of them aren't going to want to do it now. So this is the problem. So this is the issue. So that's the issue with universities.
No, 100%, I agree with you. I just think it's crazy how we're not taught about anything. There's no awareness, but then I guess it's good because it falls onto us and it's our duty and our responsibility to educate, even whether it's just in passing with a conversation. With
but if I could just say one thing, because what you just said is very important. Like, you said that you're not taught. Universities, from my understanding, what you learn in universities is done in a way that it kind of reinforces the status quo. Let's put it that way. They're not going to. Most universities aren't really going to challenge you to critically think and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But what you have is campaigns to decolonize universities, for example. Campaigns like, for example, like, in up north in Cambridge and stuff, the Road to Must Fall campaign, decolonize universities campaign and stuff like that. Those campaigns are very, very important, because those types of movements are going to be the ones that will kind of decolonize the universities and reformulate them in a way where knowledge from outside of the UK, for example, or from other communities will be taught. But you have to be part of the movement. You have to decolonize the universities in terms of decolonizing the knowledge centers that produce these these bases of knowledge where other bases of knowledge are excluded, especially. So when it comes to Palestine, one of the things that the students for Palestinian rights and Palestinian students themselves can do after supporting, and being involved with your with your own Palestine society, is to actually support the call for decolonized universities and take part in their actions and stuff like that. That's one of the things you can do, because it's very important. This shows that the universities themselves need to be decolonized.
Definitely. Thank you for that. I think we'll take this as our last question. So Asala said, what kind of calls for action would you suggest to be the most effective regarding apartheid?
Oh, so I wouldn't say one. I'm just going to quickly say, because I've been giving this a lot of thought myself. So it's a system where there's different pressure points. There's different pressure points. And there's one elusive pressure point which I will touch upon at the end, because this is, the elusive one is the most difficult one. So the thing is there's obviously one of the narratives, the narrative of Israel-Palestine, popularizing the narrative. So learning about it and educating yourself and then creating more awareness about it. One of the things about BDS is that it popularizes that narrative. That's the point. The movement talks about, literally, when you look at the movement, it talks about, the three aims: full equality between Palestinians in Israel and Israeli citizens, full equality, ending the occupation, and the right of return. These are if these agreements were met, that means apartheid and settler colonialism are finished. They're gone. That system, that's gone, that's replaced. That's one thing. Then you have groups like Palestine Solidarity Campaign and other groups like Palestine Action and all these other groups. Some of them use direct action, some of them don't. I am a member of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. I prefer Palestine Solidarity Campaign. So again, join groups, Palestine Solidarity groups, and I'm going to say join PSC and get active in PSC. However, there are some other things as well that you can do, and this is the thing that I think another, one thing that we don't talk about is that there is a growing, vibrant British Palestinian community that is growing. There are organizations like the Palestinian Community Foundation that do organize Palestinian community and cultural events. Supporting them is very important as well. Supporting the growth of the community is very important as well. They get, even though they do cultural events, they still get opposition from the Zionist groups. So basically supporting them, supporting the British Palestinian community is also another thing that you can do. But also, this is the other thing. This is the thing that is the most difficult to challenge, because it works underneath the shadows. And it goes to what this book was saying. The reason why a lot of Western governments, one of the reasons why a lot of Western governments support Israel is because of the intelligence relationships that they have with the Mossad. The Mossad provides assets, intelligence assets to these agencies and services to these agencies. And this is something that Hanan Ashrawi just said a month ago in one of her lectures. She said that the reason why Israel gets a lot of support is because it provides intelligence, to Western countries. So the thing is that is the most difficult thing to challenge, because national security state, all that kind of stuff is very difficult to challenge. But I would say that one of the things that Palestinian students can do is to support organizations like Declassified UK, who look into the intelligence services and critique them, like literally critique the national security state and try and, oppose them from a knowledge-based perspective. That's one of the things that I would say, secondary to your Palestinian solidarity, support organizations like Declassified UK, who are trying to look at the intelligence services around the world and trying to expose them. And I think that's one of the things that we can do. So there's several things, and it's up to you in a variety of ways of what you want to do. Also, campaign against the arms trade, who basically campaign against all forms of arms, but also they have a good knowledge section on Israeli arms as well. That's another organization that you can support. I personally, I support BDS. I'm a supporter for BDS. I'm part of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, but also on a secondary basis, these other organizations that I just mentioned, some of them I'm more active in, like for example, Campaign Against the Arms Trade. Others I support financially, like give them £5–10 a month, standing order. So Declassified UK, I'm a paid up subscriber of Declassified UK. That's one of the things that you can do, basically.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for all your input, all the research and the book recommendations. Also, thank you for answering everybody's questions. We all really appreciate your time. It was lovely speaking to you. Thank you for everything.
No problem. And I look forward to getting in contact with you guys again and working with you guys even more. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Take care.